Good evening, everybody. My name is Robert Smith. I'm the Ackerman professor here. I'm a professor in the School of Public and International Affairs, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you all to a talk by Cristina Jimenez, one of the founders of United We Dream and Baruch's own MacArthur Genius Fellow, for the Ackerman Lecture. It's a series on inequality. That's a Freudian slip for our current moment. It's the series on equality and justice. It's fighting the current moment. And I'm going to give the informal introduction, and Marian Engelman of the Engelman family, who set this lecture series up, is going to give the formal introduction. So I've known Cristina for 15 or 20 years or something like that. And as I always joke, I had brown hair and lots of it when we met, and now, so that shows you how long. But I'm just delighted to invite her back to her alma mater here, because it's really an awesome CUNY story. Cristina and her husband Walter were students at CUNY, and were students of mine and many others here. And I remember when they were in a class with me, they would call and say, or email and say, we're going to miss class tomorrow because we were meeting with Claire McClaskill to lobby for the DREAM Act. We're 2 or 3 votes shy. Is it okay if we miss class? I'm like, yeah, it's okay. And if you miss next week and it passes, I'll give you extra credit. We were moving in such different worlds of consequence, but it was just kind of awesome, actually, to have students who were so engaged in the world. And I remember, I don't know if you remember this, we had articles that we read, Lacey Abrigo's articles, on how to change the narrative about immigration. And I remember we had classroom talks about this 2 or 3 weeks in a row, and then I watched over the next decade when they did this, right? The conversation about immigration from 10 or 15 years ago is not what it was today. And I remember watching the conversations in that class. Now, I'm not saying that it came from that class. I'm saying I was able to help push it along and able to watch those conversations beginning to happen. And it was really quite amazing. And so it's a really beautiful CUNY story, and it's a really beautiful School of Public and International Affairs story. Because what we do here is we take students who are trying to see things wrong with the world and who want to make it better, and we train them and help them go out and do those things better than they did them before they got here. That's most simply stated, that's our mission. Now, I said I was going to give the informal pre-introduction, and like most professors, I'm beginning to go into the longer version, so I don't want to do that. I will stop myself because my enthusiasm. Oh, you know what? I'm in trouble with my boss here. Linda told me, everybody turn your cell phones off now, because Linda has a crook, like on vaudeville. They're going to pull you out of the room if your cell phone goes off. That's a joke, by the way. They don't really have that. But in any case, I would invite Marian Engelman to come up and do the formal introduction. And I really welcome home, Cristina. It's really nice to have you here. Really, it's lovely. Thank you.
Many thanks to the Ackerman chair, Professor Smith, and to President Wallerstein, and actually my appreciation to all of you for joining us here this evening. I'm especially excited to welcome our speaker tonight, and I'm looking forward to her talk on building power to win change. As a starting point, I want to recognize my family, which includes my sister here tonight, and my parents, Erwin and Rosalind Engelman, who not only made this lecture series possible, but they have a deep commitment to Baruch College and to the CUNY system, which gave our family its start and continues to provide opportunity to so many others, and particularly immigrant families today. As many of you know, this lecture series was named after my grandparents, Lily and Nathan Ackerman, who came to the United States from Eastern Europe in the early part of the 20th century. They were part of a tide of immigrants fleeing religious oppression and seeking a better life. As families of immigrants, we see ourselves in the faces at the border today, mothers and fathers. well, we do see ourselves in the faces of the mothers, fathers, and children who are also fleeing oppression, poverty, and displacement as a result of war, and as a result of climate change, I would add. When we hear that the administration is reviewing the paperwork of people who have been citizens for years to find some basis to revoke their citizenship, I think of our Uncle Joe Ackerman, who traveled out of Poland and through Canada with false papers. Fearful that he would be discovered, I knew him as an older man, someone who had a smile for me, who fit into the landscape of New York. When we see immigrants at the border, waiting for word from immigration authorities, at best, or pushed back with tear gas, we think of my grandmother, Lily Ackerman, and her mother, who waited months for a visa and endured a horrifying boat trip to Ellis Island. And after all this, when they arrived, a doctor looked them over, inspected them, and then an agent asked them to read. My great-grandmother couldn't read. And my grandmother was afraid authorities wouldn't let her mother into the country. She pleaded and told the immigration agent that her mother could read a prayer book, the Siddur. The agent fortunately let them through. We gather the week before our family celebrates Passover, the Jewish holiday, when we tell the story of the Exodus from Egypt, itself a narration of oppression and of another migration, when our ancestors took action to be free. One of the themes of the holiday is that we can't sit still, that change requires action. The text that we use on Passover quotes Rabbi Mark Margolius, who talked about the shame of living in our society, a society the richest in human history, which tolerates intolerance, which tolerates hungry children and building prisons or detention centers rather than giving people a chance at life. He said, "Our sense that these problems are too big and too complicated, our resignation that things will never change, maybe that's the greatest shame of all. Maybe our enslavement today is our inability to dream, to imagine a society and a world which reflect the holiness of every human life." The theme of the holiday, appropriately, is that we must dream, and we must take action to make that dream, freedom, a reality for all. For these reasons, I'm delighted to have the honor of introducing our speaker tonight. Cristina Jimenez is a Baruch grad, a community organizer, a strategist, and a freedom fighter. She's the executive director and co-founder of United We Dream, the largest youth-led network in the country. Born in Ecuador, Cristina came to the United States with her family at the age of 13. In New York, she attended high school and college as an undocumented student. She has been organizing in immigrant communities for over a decade and was part of the United We Dreams campaign team that led to the historic victory of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, program in 2012 that protected close to 1 million young immigrants from deportation. Under her leadership, United We Dream has grown to a powerful network of more than 100 groups and 400,000 members. For her work as a social justice organizer, Cristina was named one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine and was awarded a MacArthur Genius Fellowship by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation in 2017. She currently serves on the board of the National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy, the Hazen Foundation, Make the Road New York Action, and the Dream US. I look forward to tonight's Ackerman Lecture. Cristina.
Thanks so much for such a wonderful introduction. How are you all doing? It feels really cozy here. I feel really happy that we have a full house. So I want to start by just saying I'm really grateful to be back as an alumni. I'm a proud alumni of Baruch. Thanks for the invitation to the faculty, to the leadership of the school. I earned my master's degree here in public administration and public policy from the School of Public Affairs in 2011. And I'm really grateful and happy to be back, to see many of you here as students, faculty, and leadership. So really grateful for you all. I'm grateful not only because, Baruch gave me so much in terms of my experience here, but also because it was going through the school. And by using our faculty and the resources that the school had here, to be able to balance school, work full-time, and like many of you, also having to think about children. I was just in the pre-workshop where one of the students is also a mom, and her daughter, Sophia, was with us. And so I am grateful because I know that many of you sacrifice a lot to be in school, but also to show up to this session tonight. You may have the pressures of work, you may have the pressure of family, but also the dream of finishing your degree. And I know what it feels like to be in your shoes, so I am humbled to be here and to be back at Baruch. And a big shout out to all the students that are sacrificing so much from immigrant communities, for low-income communities, from the communities here in New York City and outside of New York City, achieving here your dreams. So shout out to you all. And I want to start by sharing that though my story did not start at Baruch College, Baruch College played a very important role in the shaping of my leadership and how I thought about the world. And I remember being a grad student, undocumented, sometimes not having enough money to buy food, but also having the support of my faculty at the School of Public Affairs to be able to finish school, but to also be able to dig deeper into things that were really important for me to do as an immigrant student. Like, for example, doing research on immigration, partnering with Robert on understanding the challenges of undocumented immigrant students here in New York, or with Professor John Casey asking the questions like, how do borders work? And why are they working in the way that they're working, not only here in the US, but across the globe? So I am really proud to say that I was able to overcome all of that and have been able to overcome many challenges and accomplish a lot. And I don't say that to brag about it, but the reason why I share this with you is because one day I was in your shoes with the students that are here in this room. And I was able to have a community of support here at Baruch College to be able to finish my degree and to courageously pursue my dream of freedom and dignity and equity for all people, including immigrants, regardless of their immigration status. And there are practical things that I learned about here too, about leadership, for example. I remember taking a management class, for those of you who are in the School of Public Affairs. Budgeting was also another class that I took. So there were a lot of very practical skills that I'm really grateful to this institution, because those skills also play a role in me being able to build a successful organization that now I'm proud to say has 500,000 members across 28 in the country, who has already made history. So when I was thinking about this talk, like Robert asked me, you need to come up with a title too. I was like, oh my gosh, I need to come up with the title too. One of the things that I thought about was maybe from Baruch to the battlefield. Sounds good, right? Then I thought about it a little bit more, and then I realized my experience didn't start only here, and it's so important to be able to look back at where I came from and everything in my life that shape who I am today. So in United We Dream, we believe that stories are powerful, and that's why I'm going to start with my own story today. Because, this day and age, when people in power are trying to divide us, they're trying to demonize immigrants or Muslim communities or women, or attack vulnerable communities, or when they're trying to fuel hate and racism in our communities, our stories must be part of the conversation and part of the picture. And it takes a lot sometimes to share our stories, but in this critical time, as we're shaping much of what we are talking in terms of what is to be an American, who gets to be an American, who gets to define that. Our stories and our experiences here, folks in this room and outside of this room, are so critical to the conversation. And that's why I want to start with a little bit of my story. I was born and raised in Quito, the capital of Ecuador, and I know that there's some Ecuadorians here in the room. Shout out to y'all. Well, we were, financially poor. The home that my parents created for me was filled with love, with support, and with abundance. My mom, Ligia, didn't finish school, and unfortunately, in her family, they did not think that women should go to school. It was only a thing that men could do. And for my dad, Fausto, he was always really afraid that, like him, our family could end up being homeless. He grew up as a young boy in Ecuador in the streets of Quito with no shelter, no food, and no family. And so when they had their family, my brother, my sister, and I, it was really important for them to give us a different life and to always dream of us being the first ones in our family to go to college, always dreaming of making sure that we can have food on the table and a roof over us, shelter. So they dedicated all of their efforts to make sure that we could do that we can have food, that we can live our dreams, that I can go to college and be the first one in my family to do so. But as you may know, global politics and economy all sometimes work to drive economic crashes in different parts of the world. And even we have experienced that here in the US. So forces beyond me and beyond my family led Ecuador to have a crisis where many companies left, leaving thousands and millions, really, of people unemployed. Presidents were removed from power. At the time, there were riots everywhere in the country. And my parents found themselves without a job for months, at a point where it became clear that we had to make a choice between food on the table or being able to pay for my school. And for my parents, that choice was clear. Education was a priority for us. So given that they were not having luck finding a job, and we were not having enough money for food or to pay for school, my parents took the very difficult and courageous decision to leave everything behind and seek a better life in this country. And though that's my family's story, I know that that's the story of many immigrants that have come to this country seeking a better life for their loved ones, including the people who are seeking refuge from poverty and violence at the border in this moment as we speak. I was just 13 years old when I landed here in LaGuardia Airport, and it was really, really hot. And I was wearing a sweater, so I just remember being really sweaty. And it was humid, and that's how New York City welcomed my family and I. But I was really excited about this new place. And my parents wanted to try to do everything that they could to work so that I could not only have food on the table, but also pursue higher education. And I'm not going to lie, that transition was hard. Sometimes people say migration is beautiful, and though I agree with that, I also think it's very traumatic, and that is also true. And it's okay, to hold both truths as possible in this conversation. It was hard because I was learning English. My language was Spanish, and so I was learning the language, and I was also transitioning into a school that was very racially divided. And I didn't understand, why the Black students were fighting with the Latinx students in the high school, why, people will not get along, how could students, cut class? What is this thing? I was fascinated by that. I went to an all-girl, very traditional, rigid school in Ecuador. And so, all of these were things that I was just learning about. Beyond the language, there were some, cultural changes that I had to go through. But I knew that we came here for a better life, so I focused on my studies. I said to myself, this is the least of things that I could do to honor the sacrifice of my parents. They had worked really hard. They had left everything behind to come to a new country. They were struggling with the language themselves. And we find ourselves living in a like 600 square foot studio in Jackson Heights when I remembered Rudy Giuliani was the mayor of New York City. And so, I know. And on top of that, we were undocumented. So, I remember realizing very quickly that the dreams and the aspirations and the perceptions that my parents had about this country, the land of opportunity, of freedom, of equity, of pursuit of justice, quickly was contradicting of the reality that I was living. My brother, at the young age of 11, was assaulted by a police officer in our neighborhood as he was walking home. Why? Because he was a young boy of color walking in Jackson Heights. I got really mad about this incident and outrage. And so I, as the oldest sister, decided to go to the prison that is on Northern Boulevard still, a few blocks away from my home. And I remember walking into the prison and saying, this happened to my brother is unjust. Why did this happen? I need to talk to someone in leadership here. And guess what the officer did? What do you think the officer did? Almost. He laughed at me. He laughed at me and he said that if I wanted, I could file for a complaint for a board to review. Yes, somebody said the name. And, I just left feeling like there was something very wrong with that. But as a teenager, I didn't know what it was. I knew in my body and in my bones that it felt really unjust. And it was the same feeling that I had when my father, working as a car wash worker in Queens, was not getting paid. And that was the case that he was experiencing as well as other undocumented workers in this car wash on Queens Boulevard. And as the only person that spoke English fluently in the household, my dad asked for help. And so I talked to the employer and demanded wages back for my dad and his coworkers. And the man just said that if they didn't like it, they could leave. Now, again, as an undocumented person, what do? Like, am I supposed to ask for help, call the Department of Labor, No, because we were fearful that we could be deported and that our family could be separated. So these were a lot of the experiences that shape what I was making of my experience in this new home. And asking questions for why the dreams and the aspirations and the perceptions that my parents have were not congruent with the experience that I was having here with my family. And I will always describe this moment as sort of like the cherry on top. I was in high school preparing to apply for college. And again, this was a very serious thing in my family. We had worked and done so much so that I could go to college. And I stood there in the hallway of my school of more than 700 students in Queens. And when I got to see my college advisor asked me if I had a social security number, and I said no. If I had a green card, she said no. What about your parents? I said no. And then she said, you can go to college. I can help you. Next. She called on to the next student. And in that moment, I said, okay, the cherry on top moment, this is not fair. This feels really unjust. Why is this happening to me? And I'm sure that it's not happening just to me. It's probably happening to other students. So I went back home crying, and I was sharing with my mother that our dream of me being able to go to college was not going to be able to become true. And I, thank my mother so much because this moment was really defining for me. That really changed the trajectory of my life. She told me that we had sacrificed too much to give up at that moment. And that if I was not going to go to school and figure out a way to make it into college, she was going to go to the school herself and have a fight with the principal. So, as a teenager, what do you think I did or chose, right, in that moment? I said, Mom, don't worry. Do not embarrass me, please. Do not show up to school. I'm going to go there, and I'm going to try to figure out who can help me with this. And I was lucky to find Ms. Berkowitz, an ESL teacher who was also the counselor of the Key Club. That even though she didn't know how to help students like me, she said, let me find out. And it was thanks to Ms. Berkowitz that I was able to put in my application for the City University of New York, and a few months later, start my college adventure and career at Queens College. But the reason why I think this story is important, not only because it was such a pivotal experience for me, but because of what my mother taught me. What my mother taught me was that people in institutions are making decisions that are impacting every single one of our lives. Here at Baruch College, at the City University of New York, in our city government, in our federal government. And if people are making policies that have an impact on my life, then people can also undo bad policies and create change. Do you agree with that? And that is the biggest lesson that my mom gave me. That when we challenge injustice, when we call into question when something feels wrong or not right, that we can create change. And she also taught me through that experience that people in institutions have a lot of power. And in fact, every single one of us here is probably a gatekeeper in some way. We are making decisions, whether you are a teacher, a counselor, a leader in an institution, a policymaker. We are making decisions that are either making or breaking people's lives. And if it wasn't for Ms. Berkowitz, I don't know what would have happened to me. So there's a real power in us and in us driving questions that will transform institutions and challenging the way that institutions work and challenging the way that people are making decisions was the greatest lesson that my mom gave me that day. And that's what shaped a lot of my questioning and a lot of my work in ensuring that not only immigrants, but that all of us have a chance at achieving our best potential, have equal opportunity, and can live with freedom and dignity in this country. So this experience, though shaped my life in that way at that moment, made me realize that, it wasn't only me. That there was a lot of other students going through the same experience. And when I found out when I was in college that there were students demanding the state to pass in-state tuition, raise your hand if you remember the in-state tuition conversation in the early 2000s in New York. There you go. I have some familiar. Look around. We were having a debate about whether or not undocumented students could go into public colleges and universities and have equal opportunity as every other student in our city, in our state. And I realized that it was the power of people coming together. Young people sharing their stories, going to Albany, talking to members of Congress, that led not only for me to be able to go to Queens College and then eventually Baruch, but of thousands and thousands of students to be able to go to college. And recently, we celebrated a huge victory in New York. The New York State DREAM Act passed. And it took 10 years to get there. But the message that I want to share with you is that we, all of us in this room, use our privilege in leadership, in the institutions that we're part of, whether that's a church or a community center or a school, to make change and to open the doors for others to come after us. So the co-founders of United We Dream envisioned a space where young people like me and others who had the same experience could be their full, authentic selves, find community, find support. Like, for example, having conversations about not only how do you fear deportation and racial profiling where you are an immigrant in this country, but also, for example, how do you date when you're undocumented? Very important conversation. And it was our belief that by us creating a safe space for people to find community and to develop relationships and to think about ways in which they can bring the lived experience and inspire their actions, that we can create change. So we are firm believers that the people who are closest to the pain are closest to the solutions. And in fact, that's been demonstrated in the work that we have been doing in United We Dream. Because the reality is that the current political system, it's not built so that people like many of us who are experiencing challenges and struggle every day are able to be part of that decision-making in a full way. So in United We Dream is the place where we brought people together, share our stories, and come up with solutions. Where we became proud about being undocumented, and a big slogan of our movement became that we were undocumented and unafraid, but that we also had the right to fight for our right to exist. And so my journey between Baruch and now is one of claiming the power, right, that it's mine, and helping other young people to know, to learn to love themselves, and to create spaces that empower others. My experience is that no politician, no elected official, no policymaker will produce positive change unless the people demand it. So there's no sense in us waiting or sometimes questioning. When we see something that doesn't feel right, ask the question. Challenge the question. Ask others how they feel about it. That's what we put in practice in 2010. While I was a student here, I was also building United We Dream. And with many young people, we were asking the question of, why is it that the DREAM Act has become a law at the federal level yet? How can we use our stories and bring our allies together to bring change? At the time, in 2010, nearly every person in Washington with institutional power was against us. They did not believe that we could achieve this policy change. And by the way, I'm not talking just about Republicans. I'm talking about Democrats and Republicans. And I'm also talking about people in other civil rights organizations that just didn't agree with the strategy that young people were putting forward. So we were rocking the boat, asking questions like, why haven't we thought about this strategy or the other strategy? Thanks so much for water. And some people didn't like it. But there were other people who were, yes, like we need to ask these questions. These are the right questions to ask. But many of them told us, you know what, you need to wait your turn. In a political system that, is designed for just a specific set of leaders can speak and make decisions, you got to wait it out. But we did not listen to that. And so sometimes people ask me, what is the advice that you would share with women or with young people? And that's exactly one of them. Do not let people shut you down. Do not let people tell you that you cannot do it. Because it's about your life, and it's about your freedom, and it's about your dignity. So fight for it. Even when people are telling you, it's not a good idea, wait for next year. It cannot wait because we feel it in our bones. So we organized and we pushed, and we got in the face of many members of Congress, many of them who refused to listen to us, many of them who wanted to meet with us. And with a Democratic president at the time, a Democratic House, and a Democratic Senate, the DREAM Act was really, really close to passing. But it felt, it did not pass by 5 votes, which included Democrats, by the way. So that is the history of policymaking sometimes. So when Barack Obama and Democratic leaders tried to lay the blame on the federal Republicans, our movement was really clear. No, when you were in power, you did not make this happen. So let's have a conversation about how you can make it happen now. So we knew that President Obama was seeking a re-election, and he had talked about his embracing views and welcoming views about immigrants. He had talked about the DREAM Act. So we asked that the president use his executive power to protect young people from being deported. And I'll share a little story that, Robert reminded me of earlier as we were doing a workshop session with other students. The Obama administration did not want to acknowledge that they were deporting young people or separating families for that matter, but they were. And so we had the White House legal counsel say to us, oh, we are not deporting young people. We don't know what you're talking about. We don't need to meet with you. But then we said, yes, let me show you the over 300 cases that we have of young people that we are trying to keep them here because they're fighting their deportations. And then Secretary at the time, Gianna Napolitano, asked for a meeting. And I said, okay, we're going to go into this meeting also with our legal counsel. But then they told me we cannot meet with undocumented people. So we have to find allies or members of our organization that have been born here that were related and connected to the immigrant experience. So we had a few leaders that we chose who represented us in this meeting with the administration. And we had this back and forth of the administration and the lawyers saying, we cannot protect young people from being deported. Our legal counsel says that we cannot do it. And we had our legal counsel say, yes, you can. And that became the cry of our campaign. Yes, you can, Mr. President, which, as you may all remember, it was also a slogan of his campaign. So we demanded that the Obama administration use executive power. We did the research. We knew that the policy was possible, even though the White House said no to us. And we used our resources available. We had professors that wrote letters. We had presidents of universities that wrote letters. We had members of Congress that spoke to the president himself. And after 2 years of campaigning, with rallies, with protests, with sit-ins, and risking arrest and civil disobedience, and many of our allies who relentlessly keep asking for protection of deportation, we were able to celebrate our victory in June of 2012 when Obama agreed with us that he could protect undocumented students from deportation. So I share that story because it's so important to understand, as many of us perhaps, studying political science or thinking about how government works, or you may be doing policy analysis and thinking about what is my role? How do I can create change? As you can see here, everybody plays a role, even the people who are in the White House. Because I got to tell you now, we don't talk to anyone at the White House. Not because we don't have to have a conversation, but because their values and the vision of this country are so contrarian to ours. And because they truly believe that people like me and many people like us in this room and others should not exist. But it's so important to think about the transformational change that we can bring when we can work together to bring forward that change. But when we have people power demanding for that change. So it wasn't only me asking for that change. It was thousands of students, thousands of young people, and thousands of allies that were asking for that change. So young people were responsible for this victory. And until this day, I remind people of the grassroots movement that took place in order to achieve this victory. So what do we learn from this? That when we organize and we push, we can win. Do you agree with me? Yes. We learned that even when politicians are saying no to us, we can say, yes, you can't. There is a way. Let's find a way. But I also want to share with you that that was not the only victory that we had. And so many people know about my story and United We Dream because of DACA. who protected close to 1 million young people from deportation, including folks like my own brother. But there were other many real victories that we have achieved across our journey. And I actually have some videos that I wanted to share with you about the work that we've been able to do. So if someone can help me, please, with some of the videos that we have for today.
When we were going to school, we got a phone call from my dad saying that he was detained. There was a wake-up. It was a real wake-up call. I didn't know what was going to happen. It was a Monday morning on October 31st when he was going to work. ICE agents came up to the car and asked if his name was Manuel Armando Arpi. Then they asked him to come with them, and that's when he got detained. My name is Jefferson Arpi, and I'm here in Washington, D.C. to find help for my dad. My dad has actually been in 3 jails. My father has been detained a year and 4 months. And yeah, I saw him mostly in Orange County, and then a little bit in New Jersey because it was like far away. And then Alabama, I saw him once, but it was like through video chat. Being without my dad for so long has actually taught me so many responsibilities, like going to work, how to manage money, how do I like pay the rent, like I'm gonna learn how to do my taxes, everything. I'm getting so much knowledge, but the fact that he's not there with me to like teach me, it's like, I don't know, heartbreaking. It just destroys my self-esteem, but that keeps me motivation. Is like my future, just like being one day like I'm gonna be a doctor, I'm gonna be a politician and get my dad out of there, or help people when they're sick. That's just like keeps me motivating. I have high hopes to get him out. I really do. On top of that, people in government now like know my dad's story and they know my experience. I'm pretty sure we're gonna get him out somehow.
Right now, in Florida, there are 1.5 million Floridians that are not able to vote. If Amendment 4 is passed, then it will give these 1.5 million their rights back to vote. And I believe that everybody deserves a second chance. Hi, my name is Bianca Pierre. I am a TPS holder here in South Florida. I have my cousin who is affected by this. He's been convicted when he was younger, and now he has a son. And I believe that he deserves a second chance back because he have done his time, paid his debt to society, and he's working with society. Canvassing has been an amazing experience. To me, it's important to go ahead and share knowledge because knowledge is power. To inform our communities, hey, this is the things that are going on and your voice can be heard by going out and vote. Hi, my name is Bianca. I'm a TPS holder and I'm here to stay.
office right there. That's Speaker Paul Ryan's office. Paul Ryan! Paul Ryan, what do we want? Free Dreamers! What do we want? Free Dreamers!
Thank you. So when you see these videos from me, it lifts up that one of the dreams that I've had has really come true. I dream with other co-founders of United We Dream that we will create a space where young people can not only feel safe, but that they can come together, even though many doors have been slammed and shut down in front of them, but that they could, by taking action, create a better world. And what you were able to see here was young people like Manuel Arpi, the young guy in the first video, whose dad was taken away by ICE and CBP, and he made the choice to fight for his community. Manuel is actually from the Hudson Valley here in New York. And he was in DC with us fighting for his dad to be released from jail, just north of us here. Bianca, who's a TPS holder in Florida, and as you know, Trump not only terminated DACA, but also the TPS program, which protects communities from different parts of the world that have experienced crises by climate change or violence. Many, many families have been impacted by this. So we know that there's a lot of attacks, and I know that it can feel sometimes very hard to, find hope. But what you were able to see in these videos is young people coming together, taking action, and bringing change. In all of these videos, all the T-shirts that you saw, all the banners that you saw, all the signs that you saw, they were designed by immigrant youth from our movement and our organization. So this movement is ours. We're building it together. And it's really important because every time an elected official wants to say no to us, we can say with full integrity and conviction that we are now backing down, just like you saw in many of those videos. So, United We Dream was born out of this idea that we brainstormed in the basement of my now husband, Walter, in Long Island. We were dreaming about this idea of creating this space, and now we're really proud to be working with thousands of young people and reaching 5 million people average every month with our work. We have trained over 50,000 people in organizing, in believing in themselves, and having the tools to be able to bring change to their communities, from Miami to DC to New Mexico to New York. So, I'll briefly close with just a moment of a lot of confusion in my own experience and a lot of fear. I had not felt the depth of fear that I felt when the current president was elected and announced as the winner on election night. It was the first time I remember in many years feeling like I could not say to my mother that she will be safe. And it was a very difficult moment for me to experience, for my family to experience, for our communities and for our country to experience. Because we knew that a candidate that had focused on promoting hate and racism against certain communities was coming into office to the poor people en masse, as he had committed. And what we have seen in the last, close to 2 years of this administration is exactly that. Many people thought, he may be kidding. He may just wants to, win votes. But what we have been able to see is that a lot of his promises have become a reality. Mass deportation is happening and unraveling in front of our eyes. And that is really difficult to experience in our communities. But we know, and what gives me hope is that when I go across the country and talking to people, more and more folks are understanding that an attack on immigrants means an attack on all people. That an attack on Black people means also an attack on brown people. That the same people that are trying to take away our health care are the same people that are trying to deport immigrants en masse. That the same people that are deciding in the halls of Congress that we should have more jails to make profit our Black and brown communities are the same people that are attacking women's rights. These are all the same people. So when we understand that we shared a common problem or challenge together, we also understand that our dignity, our freedom, our ability to live without fear and to pursue our dreams is also connected to each other's freedoms and to each other's lives, and that our future is interconnected. And so it is when I have those conversations, regardless of whether you're a Democrat, regardless of whether you are Democrat or Republican, wherever you are in the spectrum, ultimately, what we're getting down to is values. What are the values that we hold true for ourselves and for this country? Do we really want to be a country that demonizes Muslim immigrants, Muslim communities, women, Black and brown people? Or do we want to be a country that enables dignity and freedom for all people, regardless of where you come from and how you look like? A country and a democracy that works for all of us. And so that's the choice that we are all making. And I think the very exciting part for me is the awakening that is happening across the country. Because people are realizing that staying silent, it's not a choice. Because when you are silent, you are agreeing with the status quo. And so what I'm appreciating about this moment of having this moment of conversation in community is that we can talk about the values that we want for our country. That we can talk about the fact that our futures are interconnected. And that we understand that the same people that want to hurt some communities are also going after all of our communities. So I want to encourage you to think about that, the hope that there is in conversation and in community building, the hope that actually the vast majority of Americans disagree with the way that this country is going. The fact that the majority of Americans want a democracy that works for all of us, not just for the corporations. The fact that the majority of people believe that people like me should have a right to exist and to live with dignity in this country. That's us. That's the majority. So let's not take anything for granted, whether you're a student, whether you're an educator, whether you are in leadership in the city or state, whatever role you're holding. We have the power to organize. We have the power to create change in our institutions and in our communities. But we cannot build that power unless we demand it, we organize it, and we come together to take action, as you've been able to see through this story of United We Dream. So I'm really grateful for all of you, and thanks for joining us today.
Okay, so we're going to do questions and answers. We're not going to do short speeches and answers. So you have less than 1 minute to do your questions. So have a question mark at the end, and I do that. All academics do that. So I don't want to do that now. So anyway, have a question, and we have until around 20 after. Thank you again. This was really fabulous to have you home. Thank you. So I'm going to stand here and call time if you go over. Or Linda, are you going to do that? You're scarier than me, Linda. Are you going to do that? Or okay. So I'm going to stand to the side here. Go ahead. My name is Beth Raisin.
There we go. My name is Beth Raisin. Thank you, Cristina. Incredibly inspiring to hear your story and the work you've been doing. The question I have is that the work you've done is incredible, but there's a larger question, which is what kind of policy overall should our country be formulating around immigration? Because we can sympathize with your story, but at some point, don't you think we need a reformulated policy that addresses the ideals that a lot of us believe in and is workable in our country, which doesn't exist now? And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about an overarching immigration policy that would make sense for this country.
Mm-hmm. Let me just get a few questions and then I engage. Do we have any others?
I'm Michael Myers. I'm New York Civil Rights Coalition. I'm Michael Myers. I'm the president of New York Civil Rights Coalition. My question, and it is a question, is this country believes in the rule of law. It believes in the Constitution. It believes in legal processes that are not perfect. And it also believes in borders. Do you not believe in borders? How do you control borders if everybody can decide to come across the border and to live and get the same rights as citizens? And so that's my question. What about the rule of law? What about the Constitution? What about resistance on the part of people who resist the rule of law?
Hello. Hi, my name is Christopher Olivera. I'm a senior here right now. I'm the byproduct of 2 immigrants, so I'm first generation here, first generation college student. Not going to be the first to graduate. I have an older brother. My question to you is, where do you see United We Dream in 5 years? Because you've mentioned everything that's going on now. What vision do you have for the organization 5 years from now? It could be as long as you want or as short as you want, but up to you.
Sure. So I'm going to go into like the first 3 questions, and then I'm going to move into next. And I don't know who's keeping time in terms of how much time we have. Rob, okay. So in terms of first question, I think that the answer to the policy question is actually very simple. I think it's the politics of the different parties that have hijacked the conversation, really, to get us to a place that we can find solutions. But the answer is really simple in that we need to center the human beings that are part of this conversation to develop policy. So let's start first by thinking about the humans that are coming to this country, seeking refuge, coming to seek a better life for their families, many of them who are living here and are living through many of the experiences that I share. If we can start thinking about policy from a human impact perspective, it will be the first step that I recommend to members of Congress when I talk to them all the time. The second thing is that we have to create ways in which people can find a way to apply for citizenship and legalization of their status, right? Fixing their status. And we can do that because in the current moment, there is not many ways in which people can do that. And many people think that there is a line that people should get on to apply. And the reality is that there's no line in this moment to apply. So creating the ways in which people can apply and put forward applications that can go through a process so they can become citizens one day and have equal rights. And I think that we can do that without having to continuously criminalize immigrants. And that is the biggest challenge that we have in the policy conversation. People like my own parents who came here seeking a better life, under the law, they're considered criminals. And so as long as we have policies that are criminalizing families that are seeking refuge and a better life, we won't be able to address the policy question. So let's create policies that will provide a pathway to citizenship for people, protect them from being deported and from having to experience what Manuel is experiencing with his dad, while we're also not hurting people. And think about the economy and think about jobs, because the reason why we also have a lot of undocumented workers here is because of the demand. And when we are actually able to have a conversation about why is it that we are allowing for a category of workers to be working here without papers, and not having a conversation about how all workers should be able to have jobs and an opportunity to have rights and an opportunity to organize for many of them, right? So those are the conversations around policy that we continue to push for. I think that the challenge is that the politics of hate, of division, have unfortunately gotten us further and further away from finding common ground. I've had conversations with people who completely are on the other side of the spectrum of my values, who agree on certain pieces of policy change, but you have yet to see change. In fact, 89% of the American people believe that we should protect people from being deported and give them a path to citizenship. And regardless of the fact that the majority of Americans believe that, we have yet to see an outcome in Congress. So I think, unfortunately, it's less about policy, but more about the politics and how the politics have hijacked the conversation. So the second question about the rule of law, I mean, that's a fascinating question and a very great conversation to be had, especially when we're seeing an administration that is exposing, and in a moment in this country with a lot of people in elected office, including judges, are showing us how they're violating the rule of law. The way in which we're managing the human crisis at the border is a complete breach of the rule of law. There are laws set for refugees and asylees that give people the right to show up to ports of entry of the country to seek refuge and to be able to apply for refugee and asylum cases. And in this moment, we're seeing how breaching the law, how to not give respect to the rule of law is impacting people. So I think that we also ought to engage in a conversation about applying the rule of law equally for all people and for all communities. And I think that this is where the equity question comes about. So when the laws are just, when they're being applied in an equal way, then we can have an equal footing in the conversation about the rule of law. But until the laws are unjust, and until the laws are being used for certain communities and not for all, then we're having a challenge in our democracy and a very important conversation to be had. And to the last question about where we see United We Dream, I mean, you know, the vision of United We Dream.
Excuse me, sir, you've asked your question. No, she didn't answer my question. You can speak to her.
I answered the question, but I get to your border piece. Thanks for reminding me. So, you know, the question about United We Dream is United We Dream seeks to reach a day where all communities can live with freedom and dignity. And that's going to take a long time. So even in the next 5 to 10 years, we're able to win policy change that allow people like my parents and my family to live without fear in this country and with dignity. There's still a lot more to do to ensure that all of our communities, everyone in this country, has an opportunity and is able to live with freedom and dignity. And it's the struggle that we saw folks from like Cesar Chavez to Martin Luther King, Ella Baker, and many other heroes of the civil rights movement. And so we continue on being on this trajectory, and that's what I hope for United We Dream. In terms of a question about borders, I think it's an important conversation to be had about what are our policies about human flow. And we can now make this conversation a simple one because it's not. We got to grapple with the complexity of this conversation. The reality is that, for example, climate change is going to force more and more people to have to move to other places. We are seeing, in fact, climate change forcing people to leave Louisiana, Houston, Texas, and having to migrate to other states for safety. So as we think about one of the challenges of our generation, I think climate change and the movement of people are complex challenges that we have to grapple with. Because if my iPhone can move easily from China to my hands in the US, we ought to grapple up with the question of how people are able to move through different countries. Sometimes because they're being pushed out by climate change, sometimes because they're being pushed out by, quite frankly, policies of their home countries, but also policies inflicted by the US on other countries, as you may read in the media. So I think we ought to grapple with these questions, because unless we find the answer, we're gonna be caught up with perhaps one of the most important global crises of our time around climate change and migration. And I believe that the answer is within us, so we cannot shy away from it. So that's an invitation for a conversation. Let's go on to the next question.
Cristina, you've answered part of my question in advance, but I'm going to ask it anyway. you and I both have roots in Jackson Heights.
Yes.
A wonderful community, currently probably the most diverse community in the city of New York, with hundreds of languages spoken and people of all backgrounds living together, and probably filled with thousands of dreamers. I feel, and I'm frightened, that with what's going on politically, the dreamer issue has been downgraded, pushed down by the current administration and by the political arguments about borders and closing borders and whatnot. And as I look around this room and I look at these eager young faces here, and even some of my older friends, I know there are things that we could and should be doing. And I'd like to ask you what those things are and how people who want to help, who choose to help, can be effective and can help. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we take the 2 more questions? Do we have time? Okay.
Hi, Cristina. My name is Wally. I'm a CUNY student. I love a lot of what you said, and a lot of what you said, especially resonates with me, because personally, I was born in this country as well as my siblings, but my parents have had complicated immigration-related issues for as long as I can remember. And if I recall correctly, during the same time that DACA was being advocated for, there was also an effort to push a similar program for parents of citizens, deferred action for parents of Americans, and from what I recall correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's an executive order to have DAPA, but then it was challenged by the Supreme Court. Back then, I think Antonin Scalia died, and there was a deadlock in the Supreme Court. I can imagine. I don't know where the hell it is right now, but my question is, are there any efforts to revitalize the movement to push for DAPA as we speak?
Okay. Thank you. And I'll take the last question and I respond to the 3 of them.
Yeah, my question is for somebody like myself who's just ignorant on the subject, what would you, but I have an extreme story, but regardless, how would you describe a brutal view of their argument, the hard right, so to speak?
How would I what?
How would you describe their argument on this subject? I'm curious.
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Great. So thank you so much for the question about what we can do, because that is really the morale of my of my remarks, like what we can do to bring change, not only on this issue, but on many, many issues that we may care about. And as it relates right now to immigrant communities, and when I think about Jackson Heights, I think about my parents, my friends who are still there, and the vibrant community, that it's one that it's loving, that is thriving, where people celebrate where they come from, their language, their food. It's just a beautiful place. And I think that when we talk about the moment that we're in, there is a lot that we can do. And number one, we can talk with our family members or friends who may not understand the experience of immigrant communities, who may have questions, who may say, maybe what the president is doing is wrong, but I don't know why or how. I want to understand more. So the first thing is talk to your family, your networks. We can continue to change the perception, the misunderstanding, or the lack of, if we continue to have conversations. Number two, if you know of someone who is an immigrant, share with them that you care about them, that you see them in their full humanity. It's a very traumatic time to be an immigrant in this moment, when you feel like your own existence is at risk all the time. I mean, that's what I feel all the time when I speak publicly, or when I'm working, or when I'm traveling. So share with them that you care, that you see them as full human beings in their humanity. And ask them what you can do to help them, to show your support. The third thing that I will say, there are many policies in places like New York, in places like the federal government, that we can make a change by making our voice heard with our members of Congress or members of the state legislature. In fact, in this moment, there's a conversation about whether or not people like my own parents who don't have immigration status could have a driver's license so that they could work. And what we are saying is everybody in our city should have the right to drive. It's so simple, the right to drive. And so what you can do is call your representative in the Assembly, in the Senate, and make sure that they support that all New Yorkers have a right to a driver's license. The second thing that you could do with your members of Congress is to share with them that you need them to push for reforms that will provide a pathway to citizenship to immigrants without hurting more people in our communities. So those are the three simple things that you can do, and you can find the contact information of folks, of your representatives online, or you can text here to stay, one word, to 877-877, which is our community of activists and folks that want to take action with us. And that's another way in which you can take action to support our work. The second question was about DAPA. So what I will say is that, DAPA was stopped in the courts. And at this moment, given the makeup of the Supreme Court, it is not, a good strategy to think about pushing a case through. Again, when the Supreme Court actually took a decision, and even though it came down without making really a decision on the DAPA case, it's really hard to see a breakthrough on the courts on that. And this is why what we are asking people to think about is, one, the defining importance of the 2020 election, not only because it's a presidential election, but because it also means that our members of Congress are up for re-election as well. And unless the people who are making decisions about our lives change in DC and in Congress and in the White House, we're not going to be able to see change. So we need to keep advocating, and we need to exercise the power that we have to vote so that that change can happen. What we are really looking at right now is all the ways in which Congress can make permanent protections for people, which is the only body in our branches of government that can really permanently change the situation. So I know, many parents, including my own, could have benefited from DAPA. It was really heartbreaking to push for many years for the Obama administration to do this, but unfortunately it was stopped at the courts, which is also why, important to think about people who make it to the Supreme Court, people who are judges, people who are in the legal profession, how important it is that we participate in the decision-making around that as well. And then lastly, I think that there are two different views on what we may describe as people who disagree with my values about this country. I believe that our country, even though it's not yet the country of equity for everybody, because it's been equity for just some people. It's not a country yet where all of us can pursue our dreams equally. It's not the country of freedom yet. I truly believe, though, that we can get there collectively to fulfill those founding values. Because as we know in history, it's been freedom for some, not for all. It's been equity first for men, not for women, then eventually for women, and so on and so on. And also recognizing the history of our country, one that was started on genocide and the killing of Native Americans of this land, as well as built on slavery that then went into Jim Crow. And as many talk about now, the new Jim Crow. So I think understanding all of that, there are people who may just not understand, what my experience is, who may be curious about what my experience is and why do I care about the values that I care about. And I engage in conversations with those people. There may be people that I believe in equality and equity, but I want to understand the immigrant experience because I don't know about it or I disagree with it. And we can have a conversation about it. Because ultimately, when one group is able to be discriminated against other folks, other communities are impacted. So as long as all of us can have access to equity and dignity, I think that that's the way we need to see it, how my life is connected to yours and how policies that affect your life affect my life. And then there's other category of people who truly, and I think under this political environment we have seen, that there are people who do not believe that people like me should exist. That there are people in this country who believe that people that look like me should also be kicked out. Those who believe in mass deportation right now. Those who believe that Muslim Americans should not have the same right. Those who believe that African Americans should not have the same right. Those who believe that women and LGBTQ people should not have the same rights. And when people do not see the value of my existence or do not accept my existence, then it's really hard for me to be able to find common ground with them. So I think that when people do not see your humanity and your existence and want to negate your existence, I think that we're talking about a different conversation, which really gets us to, the deep-rooted racism and white supremacy in this country that I think is a conversation to also be had. So I think that as long as we can find common ground and be able to talk about our values and learn from each other, even if we may not come from the same walk of life, we could find solutions. We could find places of agreement, as long as we are able to hold each other's humanity at the same place. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I pass it back to you, Robert.
So please join me in thanking our speaker again. And I want to reiterate my thanks to the Engelman family, as always, thank you, and to President Wallerstein for coming. And we also have our new Associate Dean, Patra de Lanker-Junes, who I've never met before, but who I figure that must be who you are. Welcome her. And thank you all for coming, and it's really good to have you back here at Baruch. So thank you. Good night.